Understand? Now, if the security isn't here, then people wouldn't want to come to the Husayniyah. The question is that generally for everyone? Or is that specific to IUS? Everyone. So what's specific to IUS? Manchester. That if you don't protect it, and you lose it, nothing wrong with that at all. But if we assume that the specific component to IUS was what? Diversity, allowing it to spread its wings, allowing it to be a place where everyone felt comfortable. If you remove that central pin from your community, tomorrow IUS will collapse. Because that's what you're based on. You understand? So the second component in order to verify the strength of a community, the strength of a society, is to protect the specific components of your own community. Number 3, priority needs. Always things that need to be protected bil-awlawiyya, by priority, that are at the foremost of your needs. Imagine now, here, sitting right now, I'm just making an example. We closed all the windows and doors, and no oxygen came in. What would happen over a period of time? We'd die. There are certain things that need to be protected in a society. And they are so priority that if they're not protected, your civilization will die. Your civilization will collapse. Your community will collapse. Here, we need to understand that there are priority needs. And some of them, for example, are security. Things like clean air, just as an example for you to think about. Now, you know, in China, in India, there is so much smog that they have to walk around with those face masks. Because the pollution is so bad that hundreds of thousands of people a year die just from the smog inhalation. The question is, does the government consider it to be a problem? Do the people in charge, the leadership, realize it's a problem? And if not, and they don't do anything about it, then you'll see the general trends and the priority needs conflict. And the way in which the leadership are responsible will not be able to understand that society. Now, in our first night's lecture, we're going to come to this in a few nights' time, inshallah. We spoke about the environment. And we stated that by 2050, only 30 years from now, there will be parts of this world that are uninhabitable. Because the way in which we are destroying our own environment, our topsoil, we are destroying trees. We're wiping out the lungs of civilization so that the trees are not able to take in carbon dioxide and emit oxygen. What happens to you and I as a civilization? 2050, not long. We have to think about our priorities as a civilization, which we're going to come to, inshallah, a whole discussion on environment. Human experience. This one is an interesting one and becomes very specific to some of the challenges that we're getting now. The fourth way to determine whether your community is strong or not, whether or not your society is strong or not, your nation, your world, the experience of people. And I'm going to mention this, and I really want my brothers to pay attention, inshallah. Right now, one of the biggest points that we find in our time, especially in the West, and also some places in the East, is a particular movement by one half of the world telling us that there is a problem in society. You know where it's coming from? Sisters are telling us about over-sexualization, about violence, and we're seeing it everywhere when it comes to the hashtag #MeToo movement, or for example, when we're coming to the way in which people are being treated. The complaint is made, and people are beginning to wake up to the reality of this gender abuse, the imbalance within the society. If one component of the society, through human experience, tells us something is not right, the way in which we're being treated is not fair, there isn't a balance. This is the fourth way in order to understand whether your civilization is teetering on failure or success. Because certain times you can tell something is going to happen. What happened in 1930? What happened in 1940? when particular classes of people were scapegoated, demonized. The Jewish community of Europe, the Roman community of Europe, all the way from France to Germany to Poland to Hungary, where eventually millions were killed. Today, there is so much pressure on especially Muslims and thinking about the way in which we respond to events. Are we apologetic? Are we not apologetic? Do we have to tell everyone we're about peace or we're not about peace? Do we have to give up our belief system or not? What happens when tomorrow, now they're trying to ban the niqab, what happens tomorrow when they go after the hijab? Are you ready? Do you know what's going to happen next? Have you understood what happens in 10 years' time in this civilization? Or are we just burying our head in the sand, hoping that our leadership will take care of it over in Najaf in the Qom for us here? Is that where we've reached? Burying our head in the sand? The human experience innately tells you something is happening. Innately, through the dialogue, awakens you to the reality of what is occurring. Fifth, expert opinion. Expert opinion helps us to understand what's happening in our own communities and civilizations. And these are divided into two. The first is expert opinion in their sciences and fields, and the second is expert opinion within our own school of thought, what we would refer to as maraja, or our senior ulama, when their knowledge be able to exist to tell us what are the circumstances in our communities and societies. We have to be able to follow expert opinion. So here, Ayatollah Mudarrisi tells us these five are means to study your community, your civilization, your state, your world. And when we apply these five, we're able to then think about where we are as a community today, where we're going tomorrow. I pose this question rhetorically. First to the leadership, you and I as members of the community. Do we know whether our societies are strong or not? Whether our communities are strong or not? Where they're going? Or is it down to the Bank of England to tell me whether it's strong or not? Or is it down to an AGM when the president of IOS will read, what's been achieved to tell us whether we're strong or not? Because when it collapses, it affects all of us. When it rises and flourishes, it affects all of us. And that's why, inshallah, we can take these things away to reflect on. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So now, we can see that there are different historians, different philosophers, different experts that study civilizations and societies in different ways. And there exists another famous scholar by the name of Samuel P. Huntington, who has written a book by the name of Clash of Civilizations. And he believes that primarily there is a clash between the Muslim world and the Western world. And so long as that clash exists, these two will always be at war with each other, and it requires an end game. There needs to be a winner between these two civilizations. And he highlights this in his book. At certain points he talks about other civilizations. For example, when he talks about the Serbs and the Croats and what happened in that part of Europe and the massacres that took place, he argued there were three civilizations that were clashing. For example, he says there was Western Christendom, Eastern Christendom, and Islam. And these three clashed. And eventually when they clash, there must be war, there must be massacre. So tonight, inshallah, I raise this question to you. Which civilization do you belong to? What's your priority civilization and your identity? Are you Shia first? Are you Muslim first? Are you British first? Are you European first? Well, where does Europe end? Does Europe end with Spain or does Europe end at the Nile? Are you human first? And I will show you, inshallah, certain ayat and ahadith and some ideas between them to show you the different perspectives and for you and I to think about at what point we become Shia first, at what point we become Muslim first, at what point we become human first, and what is the relationship between those three, inshallah. The first thing for us is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the title of being Muslim. And in fact, in our ahadith, we are also given the title of being Shia. Therefore, these are honorable titles given to us from divine sources, but we need to ensure that we keep hold of these titles in the right time and in the right space. And of course, in the right way. So I bring to you, for example, an ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the last verse of Surah Al-Hajj, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. Strive hard in the way of Allah as He deserves to be struggled for. Strive for Him the way in which He deserves to be struggled for. Allah has chosen you and placed upon you the religion, or not placed upon you in the religion any harm, difficulty. Which religion? It's the religion of your forefather Ibrahim alayhi salam. Allah named you Muslims before this. Even before this, you were considered to be under the title of being Muslim. So we have one identity here. Allah has told us that we are Muslim. Elsewhere we have, for example, the hadith of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. If we can ask the brothers to leave a good gap, and if everyone can come forward. For the love of Sayyida Zainab, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We are given the title, the identity of being Muslim. In the hadith, for example, we also have the title of Shia being given to us. For example, Rasulullah says, Ya Ali, you and your Shia will be successful. Meaning that we also take on that title. The question, of course, now is the title Shia something that is about a name, or is it about an action? And then, of course, you have the hadith of the fifth Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. When Imam alayhi salam says, "O Jaffer, do you think it is enough for you to say that you love us and that is it? Do you think crying and beating your chest and going on ziyarah, loving us, just love in your heart is enough to be Shia?" And this is when Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam begins to list various qualities of what a Shia is, in terms of their salah, in terms of their recitation of Quran, in terms of them being honest, in terms of them returning their amanat that is given to them. Once we have these things, then we're actually Shia. Otherwise we are muhibbeen, we are lovers. But to be Shia is not a title. To be Shia is really through action. So we have these titles being given to us. Now, in terms of our responsibility, there is a very interesting hadith which comes to us by Sheikh al-Saduq alayhi rahmah. Please have a look at this hadith and think about the context in which the Imam is speaking, and then also the way in which you and I might apply it today. To what extent is the hadith applicable? Is it only for the caliph or the leadership? And is it for the awam? Let's have a look at this interesting hadith from our 8th Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Sheikh al-Saduq alayhi rahmah mentions in Ayun Akhbar al-Rida, where he states that the Caliph Ma'mun al-Rashid writes a letter to Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. And he tells him that we, the Abbasid dynasty, the government, the kingship, has conquered many towns, and we've made them Muslim. We've now conquered so many new areas. Oh, Imam al-Rida, are you not happy? Aren't you delighted that we've made more towns, forced them to become Muslim? Imam al-Rida alayhi salam writes back the following. He says, does conquering one of the towns of the pagans make you happy? Are you really happy that you've conquered the pagans? Fear Allah in the way in which you deal with the nation, the ummah of Rasulullah, and the mission that God has given to you. So what do we see here? We see that Allah has named us Muslim. And we see that we have an ummah of Rasulullah. So are we from the ummah? Is this our civilization? Are we supposed to be responsible to the Ummah, or Britain, or Europe, and so on and so forth? Be careful of the way in which you deal with this Ummah. You have left the Muslims unattended to, and have turned running their affairs over to others who rule over them in ways different to what God has decreed. Ma'mun, you're conquering all these lands, but you're giving it to your governors, and they don't care about the Muslims. You're responsible for what happens, he says. You have totally forgotten about these towns inside the Ummah already, and you've abandoned the town of Medina. There is no taking into consideration the believers, the oppressed people there are having hard times. They cannot provide even for their basic expenses. They find no one to complain to regarding their conditions, and they cannot reach to you as the leadership of this community. Attend to the affairs of the Muslim first. So here we have something very interesting. We have the Muslim, we have the Shia, and we're also told that there is an Ummah for the Ummah of Islam. And we are told our responsibility to it. This is important. Please listen to this hadith from Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Man asbaha, the one who wakes up in the morning, وَلَا يَهْتَمُّ بِأُمُورِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَهُوَ لَيْسَ بِمُسْلِمٍ. The one who wakes up in the morning and does not have concern for the affairs of the Muslim community, he is not a Muslim. The one who wakes up in the morning and does not have concern for the affairs of the community of Muslims shouldn't consider himself Muslim. Now, it doesn't mean that you've left the framework of Islam if you don't do it. It means, again, in terms of the responsibilities that comes with a Muslim, the expectations that come with La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. When you and I wake up, we are responsible to know what's happening in the Ummah. Be it in Yemen, be it in Syria, be it in Palestine, be it locally, at least to be aware, to make an effort to see what's happening, so that we can feel like a Muslim Ummah in some broad expense, some broad degree. So here we are responsible at these levels. Now, I'm going to make a different direction and a turn, because everybody probably already knows you're responsible to the Muslim Ummah in some way. But today, our paradigm is that we live in nation states. Muslim Ummah practically doesn't exist. It's very difficult to concern for 1.8 billion people across 200 countries. What does that mean today? The opinion then comes that as the paradigm shifts, we too also have to begin to consider our own paradigm shifting as well. We don't live in 7th century Arabia. We don't live as the Ottomans do. We live in 2018 and have to be understanding of the paradigm of 2018. The same way we have an ummah of Rasulullah, according to Quran, the primary ummah is which ummah? The ummah of mankind. We are responsible to the entirety of mankind. How do we know this? Islam is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is for all of mankind. Therefore, Islam is also for the whole of mankind. Islam isn't for you and I only. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam isn't only for you and I. We often say this. The awaited savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, is also for the whole of humanity. And if you look in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's primary description of the ummah is not ummah of Muslims, ummah al-Islamiyah. It's not the ummah of the Shia. The primary usage of the word ummah in the Quran is ummatan wahida. You are one human global community. And this is where also our responsibility lies. Have a look at some of these ayat, and inshallah we conclude. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. And if God had willed, He could surely have made you all one single community. But He willed it otherwise. He allowed you to be different communities, different nations, different tribes, different states, different civilizations. Why? In order to test you by what He has given to you. We talked about yesterday and today, with Al Saud, given all of these blessings, gave it to them. For what purpose? To use for humanity, not to be doing the things that they do, which destroys humanity, destroys the soul. So Allah has made us, originally, He could be one ummah. Now, it's interesting, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in a different context. He says to us the following, and know that all of mankind were once, وَمَا كَانَ النَّاسُ إِلَّا أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. What was the problem? فَاخْتَلَفُوا. We used to be one human community, but then we differed amongst each other. You know when? When guidance came to us. And we decided to make guidance not about God, but we wanted to make guidance about ourselves. We wanted to decide the interpretation. We wanted to be more powerful and utilize the books of divinity for our own ends and means. To utilize the religion for our own pockets. You used to be one community, but then you decided to split and hold divergent views. Had it not been for the decree, all their differences would have been settled. Allah wills, all of us could be considered one human community. Next verse. And had I sustained a will, He surely could have made you one community. And it's mentioned elsewhere several times in the Quran. You could be one entire ummah, human community. Now this raises the question that if God can return mankind back to one nation, right? وَمَا كَانَ, you were, what is stopping? What stops all of us from moving away from being Britain and America and Germany and Brazil and Mexico and all these rivals? What stops us? What's the impediment that stops us from having one human community? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in 2 verses, it is we who have apportioned amongst them their livelihood in the life of this world, and we have raised some of them in degrees above others. Why? That they make use of that for each other in service. If America is given certain, risk, and Iraq is given risk, and Saudi is given risk, this isn't for you. The oil isn't for you. The water isn't for you. The economy isn't for you. The community isn't at your service. It's for you to come together and become better as people for a mixed purpose. The wealth that you have is not for you. Wealth is to make better all of us as a community. Now that Allah gave all of these different resources in varying different degrees for the purpose of service, but the mercy of your Lord is better than what you accumulate. Now, what's the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, accumulation, you wanting to accumulate more wealth and resource is what stops the nations coming together. Rivalry amongst nation states, hoping that they can brutalize, that they can colonize, defeat one another. What does He state in the very next verse? And were it not that all people would become one community, were it not for all of your rivalry and wanting more and more and more greed and wealth, you would be a community as a world nation. Ummatan wahida. Now think about your responsibility as people. Where does your loyalty lie? Allah says you could be one human community. What stops you is you putting your own nation above the needs of everybody else. I want to make my country the best. America first. Britain first. Greatest country in the world, they say. This is not how Islam wants you to look at things. Don't fall into that trap of that type of nationalism. Yes, be patriotic, proud of where you're from. Make it better. You are not supposed to make your country a rival to another country for the sake of wealth and dominance. But what happens to us is we fall into this idea I've got to make my country better than everyone else, destroy everyone else, colonize everyone else. My country is the best. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, that's what stops us from uniting as people. The impediment is what? Materialism. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala verse gives us the solution. He says, Inna hadihi ummatakum ummatan wahida. This community is one community of yours. Wa ana rabbakum fa'budun. I am your Lord. Worship me, don't worship your wealth. Don't worship your resource. Don't worship your military. And certainly don't worship your nation state's flag. Because وَكَمْ أَهْلَكْنَا مِنَ الْقُرُونِ. How many nations before did we destroy? You want to put all your stock into this flag? You want to put all your stock in a minute it can be taken from you? And it's going to be inherited by someone else? You are responsible to the ummah of Rasulullah, and according to the Quran, you are responsible to the entirety of mankind. If you and I awoke to that realization, it would truly change the way in which we engage and the way in which we deal with people. Last slide. It's interesting because now someone will say, yeah, I know, but ummatan wahida, it doesn't really include the whole of mankind. We're just from the Muslim ummah. Didn't the Prophet believe that the Muslim ummah, the ummah is primarily Muslim, that my identity is primarily Muslim and not human? Actually, no. The first society in Islam didn't, please understand this, didn't define the ummah as primarily Muslim. It considered the ummah to be all different faiths, different creeds and sects as one ummah. You will say, I belong to Islamic ummah. No. The Prophet believed any positive society was an ummah based on all faiths, all creeds. When the Holy Prophet of Islam moved to Medina, he wrote what is known as the first constitution of Medina. And I've taken this from the book, The Message by Ayatollah Jaffer Subhani. May Allah grant him a long life. Sheikh Subhani points this out. And he says, look at the way in which Rasulullah defines the ummah in Medina. Is it Muslim? It's not Muslim. Rasulullah wrote this document with 40 points, bringing all the nations, all the tribes, all the different faiths under one document. What does it state? Look at this, part 1, article 1. The signatories to the agreement form one ummah. According to Rasulullah, when faiths come together, when sects come together, they all make one ummah. So at one level we do represent the Shia ummah. At another level we represent the Muslim ummah. At another level we represent all faiths coming together to work together. And at another level our civilization is the human civilization. There's times for you to represent the Muslim identity. There's times when you represent the Shia identity. And there's times when you represent the human identity. And depending on the circumstance, when that identity comes forward. And inshallah, we can start to talk about that tomorrow as we start to go into our series proper. To conclude, there is a video I want to show you, and it will be 3 minutes, and then we'll go into the gham, inshallah. Just pause it for a second. The title of this video from YouTube is by a professor and by the name of Philip Kitchener. And this professor asks this question about race, because we're asking this question today about which civilization am I from? The European race, Muslim race, where am I from? And he shows us that this concept of race is entirely socially defined. You can call yourself black, you can call yourself white, you can call yourself yellow, you can call yourself European, you can call yourself African. But we have created those terms. There's nothing inherent in those terms. So when we want to talk about championing humanity and making sure the one ummah comes together, we have the choice of making division, and we have the choice of bringing people together. This is the challenge of our time, learning to bring people together. So Professor Kitchener is now going to chart to ask this question to you. What race do you think you are? And why do you think you come from that race?
Okay, so what should we make of the concept of? There are a lot of anthropologists who would say we should just throw this concept away completely. There's no basis for it. And those people are responding to what many scholars call essentialist notions of race. There's something about this particular group of people, perhaps about their anatomy or their physiology or their brains or their genes or something like this that differentiates them from various other groups of people. If there's one thing that we've learned from biological science and psychological science over the last century, it's that there's an enormous amount of variation within the groups that we've traditionally thought of as races, far more than there is between groups we've traditionally thought of as races. And it turns out that if you look at things from a genetic point of view, the certain kinds of molecular sequences are more common in some groups than in other groups. That's because during the course of human history, these groups have been separated from one another. They haven't been married, and that's given various chances for various kinds of genetic material to become prevalent in some groups, but not in others. But the first thing to say about that is that these differences are trivial, largely trivial. There are some cases, as well-known diseases, that tend to affect some groups more than others. That is not trivial for the sufferers. But by and large, these differences are perfectly trivial. Now, about 15 years ago, a tremendously brilliant study was done by researchers at Stanford that actually divided the human population into groups that the researchers themselves called interbreeding populations. They didn't want to call them races, but very quickly the popular press picked this up and started referring to them as races. So you might start out with the human population and say, ask the following question. On the basis of biological evidence, gene frequencies, molecular frequencies of DNA sequences in different populations, what would you get if you wanted to divide the population into two? You get actually Africans and most Asians, Central and Western Asia, and Europeans as forming one group, and the rest of the human population as forming another group. Now, what would happen if you did it into three groups? Well, then you get the Africans separated out from the Eurasian population. What would happen if you did it for 4, 5 groups, 6 groups, 7 groups, 8 groups, 9 groups? The first 5 or so of these give you something like sort of standard racial groups with a few odd little twists. The 6 gives you, as the 6 of these groups, gives you a tiny little population that has been isolated because of mountain barriers in Asia. Now, those are genuine divisions that have come out of our human history and that are still present in the DNA sequences of the genomes of various people. But whether we want to draw any distinctions at all within the human population is completely up to us. Remember how I did this? I said, if you want to divide the human population to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5, to 6.
Whether you want to divide the human population into 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is up to you. When it comes to races, these things are socially created. You can divide it and say this race exists, this race exists. But if you really want to come together as a human civilization, first thing you need to do is get rid of those social divisions in the first place. This whole concept of white supremacy, European supremacy, Muslim supremacy, Shia supremacy, it's all in your head. Here as a human community to come together, to be able to raise ourselves and to make the human community what the Holy Quran said. كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. Your generation is the best one heralded for mankind. Why? Because collectively you did تَأْمَرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. And this is where we need to reach to. Tomorrow night's question will start with this. When are you firstly Shia? When are you firstly Muslim? When are you firstly British? And when are you firstly human? When are you firstly Iraqi? And so on and so forth. Because as we stated, these divisions can be created by you. Tomorrow, these boundaries, these borders will be taken away. So which one am I? And when am I? These particular identities. And then we will ask the next question tomorrow night by asking, what happens when a society, a nation, a community lies to itself about its own past? And that will help determine when we are Shia first, when we are Muslim first, and when we are human first, how then we deal with tackling the rise and fall of our communities and civilizations. One of the hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, speaks ever so beautifully about the concept of the human civilization coming up together. He says, مَا أُمِّرَتِ الْبُلْدَانِ إِلَّا بِمِثْلِ عَدَلٍ. Lands, countries cannot flourish unless until there is justice amongst themselves. If you want to make the world, humanity flourish, it is about bringing us up together, justly. Imagine now, this man's son, when he sees from his own companions, there are people of every type of denomination, every type of background. In the army of Hussein ibn Ali were companions who were black, companions who were Christian, companions who were slaves, companions who were noblemen. And at the end of it, by virtue of their a'mal and their sacrifice, we come year after year, not to look at them primarily through their color, not to look at them primarily through their social standing, not to look at them by their own historical background, but to see them as companions of Hussein ibn Ali, the giants of humanity that they were. We can do it when we want. We can drop all the secondary conditioning and see them as the people that Hussein said that they were. I know not of anyone who has had companions like I have had. At that moment, it doesn't matter whether he was black or white, whether he was from Persia or Arabia, whether it was a woman or a man, young or old, we venerate them all together equally. It shows you what Hussein was about. It shows you what the companions were about, and how we need to instill and imbibe that. Tonight, two companions we will speak about, inshallah. The first one is Hur, and the second is Habib ibn Mawah. Hur, as you know, was the commander of the Yazid army and had with him approximately 4,000 soldiers under his battalion. He was the one who stopped Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam from going on his route and driving him in towards Karbala. And eventually was the one who would force him to leave from the banks of the river Euphrates on the 7th of Muharram. When Hur reaches camp and the army of Imam, he is told by instruction of letter from Ibn Ziyad, stop Hussein, keep an eye on him, spy on him, and stop him so that he has a choice of either surrendering and going back with you towards Ibn Ziyad, or if not, he should fall under the sword. When Imam is on his horse and wishes to turn away, when Imam wishes to move and be left to go on his own, at that moment, Hur grabs the reins of the horse in order to stop Hussein. And at this moment, Imam al-Hussein says to him, O Hur, may your mother weep over you for what you have done. Hurr responds by saying, O Hussein, had your mother not been anyone other than Fatima, I would have been able to say the same thing to you as well. May your mother weep over you. But knowing who Fatima al-Zahra, Salamullahi alayha, is, I am not able to say this to you. We will say, O Hurr, on the 10th of Muharram, surely Fatima was crying and weeping over Hussein. We are told in the books that Hurr was pacing up and down inside his tent on the afternoon of the 10th of Muharram. The war has already begun. They have already stopped the water. They have already sought to kill Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. But now Hurr is walking up and down inside his tent. His companions with him say to him, O Hurr, you have been known as the most bravest warrior from this army. Why do you seem like you are so scared at this moment? Why do we see you in such a state at this moment? Hurr responds famously by saying, at this moment I am pacing between heaven and hell. Does Hurr wish to go towards heaven, or does Hurr wish to be damned for eternity to the pits of hellfire? Our Dhakirin and Ulama tell us that in the other tent, Hussein turns towards Abu Fadl and says to him, O Abbas, in a minute go out and meet, because there will be one last companion to come and join our ranks. On the other side of that tent, in Hurr's tent, he makes his decision. I wish to live and die with Hussein. And at that moment we are told that he tells his servant to bind him and to drag him, to take him towards the tent of Hussein. Abbas goes out to meet him, and we are told that Hurr has with him his servant and his son. Hurr comes towards the tent of Imam, and as he enters in towards the tent, he throws himself at the feet of his master Hussein, and he says to him the words, Halli min tawbah? Has my repentance been accepted? Is there any way for you to accept me after what I have done to you, O Hussein? It is my fault that I hear Sukaina crying out al-Abash. It is my fault that Imam al-Baqir's his throat is burning with the heat from the lack of water. It is my Abdullah al-Radi is needing water. Is there any way for me to be able to have my repentance accepted from you? At this moment, Imam Hussein responds to him and says, Tallahi, I swear by Allah, your forgiveness has come, it has been accepted. Hurr is the one to go out and fight. He is the one to stand in front of the enemies and say to them, do you not know what we are doing? Do you not know what you have done? Do you not know that this is Hussein ibn Ali, the grandson of Rasulullah? And Hurr is the one to go out and fight, and he is the one to go out and be martyred. As he is struck on his blessed head, the blood gushes from his head. He calls out, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdillah. Hussein comes towards him. He places the head of Hurr on his lap. He says to him, O Hurr, indeed you are Hurr the way in which your mother named you. You are free, you can also now die as a free man. He places his handkerchief on the head of Hurr and stopping the blood from gushing out. We are told that when Hurr's body was resurrected, when he had to be dug up to be reburied, that his body was so fresh that even when they lifted that handkerchief, the blood continued to run from him. But the beloved, he was the great companion Habib ibn Madah. When Habib left Kufa and arrived into Karbala, it was only but a few days before the battle was going to take place. Do you have a best friend in the world? Do you have someone that you love so much, that you have grown up with, that you have told everything to, that you have gone and visited them? They have seen you grow up, they have seen your marriage, they have seen your kids, you have seen the way in which they have developed. Imagine that best friend of yours is about to be cut to pieces. His head is about to be severed in front of you. This is what Hussein ibn Ali had to endure when his best friend and his beloved Habib came. Habib was an elder man. Habib came towards Karbala, and because he was known as such a warrior and known as such a beloved of Hussein, there was a commotion that took place upon his arrival. The ladies wanted to know what was happening outside the tents. Has war begun? Has us? What's happening outside? Zainab sent a messenger. Find out what is happening outside. Why is there such a skirmish? Why is there people talking so loudly? At this point, she is told that Habib, the beloved of Hussein, has arrived to help Hussein, not to leave him alone in his hour of need. At which point Zainab says, send my salam, my salutation towards Habib. Imagine receiving the salutation of Zainab. Imagine you and I as lovers of Hussein alayhi salam, that we can have the salutation of Zainab sent to us. Imagine what that must feel like. When Habib heard that Zainab sent him salutation, he said, who is Habib to receive the salam of Zainab al-Kubra? Upon having seen this, the companions are buoyant, the companions are so pleased, but they don't know what is going to happen to Habib later on the afternoon of the 10th. According to the Maqtal, 2 companions were together by the name of Abu Thamama and Habib ibn Madahir. Abu Thamama turns towards Imam al-Hussein in the meridian time, just as Dhuhr time comes in, and says, "Oh Hussein, my Imam, has Salah not now come in? Should we not stop to be able to recite our prayers?" Listen to this, everyone. What is most important to Hussein? To carry on the war or to stop the war? Hussein stops the war. He says towards the enemies, we're going to be able to pray our salah. O Abu Thamama, may Allah make you from amongst those who have remembered and established the salah. He doesn't say, may Allah make you amongst the shuhada. May Allah make you amongst those who have established the salah. At this point, he now asks them to give them some time to be able to recite their salah. At this moment, the enemies see that they're beginning to pray. They call and say, will you have your salah accepted? How will you have your salah accepted? This enrages these great companions of Hussein ibn Ali. It is said at this moment, they turn round towards Hussein. Habib ibn Madahir says to him, "Oh Hussein, do you think your salah will be accepted, whilst the salah of Hussein ibn Ali will not be accepted?" He says to his master, Hussein, "I wish to be able to pray salah in the heavens. I want to pray salah with Rasulullah. I want to pray salah with Ali." He rushes out in towards the battlefield. As he does so,